What did we expect from this journey of life? And what has been our reality? Bright skies, stormy nights, confusing bends, uninvited suffering. How do we respond? Or do we simply just get on with life? The journey through suffering toward healing may sound precarious, but it awakens courage and peace. Today's guest is Susan Habegger of Thrive Life Skills and the author of a new song course, which we will be launching soon through life groups. We can hardly wait for you to get to know Susan through this episode. Welcome to Living the Reclaimed Life podcast. I'm Denisha. We're glad you're here for conversations that revive hope, inspire healing, and encourage you to live a vibrant life with Christ. So grab a cup of coffee as we chat with today's guest.
Welcome back to another episode of Living the Reclaimed Life. This is Valerie with Denisha, and we are so excited to have on our podcast today Susan Habegger, who we have been sharing with you about. And she has been on our podcast before, and she is coming to speak at our women's conference we've been talking about here in Tucson, Arizona. And we are in partnership with Susan to implement her healing material. And we are going to be turning that into a 12-week course that we are going to invite women to join the journey with us as we journey through the pain of our past toward healing. So we want to welcome you, Susan. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be with you.
And I just want to share a little bit about Susan. She works through her humanitarian nonprofit, Thrive Life Skills. And this is their vision: to come alongside and walk with the suffering in the circumstances under which they must live their lives, to provide hope and to discover a courageous and peaceful way forward. So thank you, Susan, for being here. And we're excited to have a conversation with her and let you get to know her a bit as we talk with her about her mission, her passion to help women journey toward healing.
Thank you.
Susan, we had a really interesting introduction, and so thankful for our sweet friends, Rhonda and Jeff, who brought us together. I know I received a text one day and it said, "You need to meet this lady. You need to meet our friend Susan." Well, tell us a little bit about Rhonda and Jeff. You can kind of tell our listeners a little bit about Rhonda and Jeff and how this all came together, because it was such a God moment.
It really was a timing miracle. I lived in Colorado at the time, and I had no idea that Jeff and Rhonda were in Colorado. I thought they were still in Arizona, which is where you got to know them. And through my cousin, we found out that they were literally 10 minutes down the road from me and had lived there for a year, and I didn't know it. And the interesting twist in things was that we found out, and at that time, I was then going to be moving to Michigan. And so they had come, and now I was going to be moving. But we got together and we were just sharing about our lives. And I shared some things that had happened in my life. And they said to me, the reverse of what was said to you: "We need to put you in contact with Denisha because her heart is in the same direction. And we just believe that God is bringing the two of you together." And as afterwards, after we did and we talked, and I'm jumping ahead and you can go backwards, but I let Jeff know, both of them know, that the connection was good and God was going to use it. And Jeff shared, he said, "I have tears right now because that's what we pray, is for God to use us in his work. And you never know exactly how he's going to do that." So Jeff and I are actually twins. We were born on the same day, which was yesterday on Flag Day, in the same hospital. Our mothers were there at the same time. So at least we'll always know how old the other one is.
Okay, that is so fun. First of all, happy birthday.
Yes,
happy belated
thank you.
birthday.
Thank you. Thank you. And Jeff and Rhonda were both schoolmates of mine. So that's where we got to know each other.
Isn't that fun? And we're so thankful for that encounter that you guys had. One, to catch up, and
Yes.
two, to connect all of us together, because it really, as soon as we heard your heart And you are years down the road in this work. You know, this ministry is 4 years old. The way you articulate the healing journey, the way that God has just moved in your life to help other people, it was so aligned. It was ridiculous. We were trying to write a curriculum at the time of some sort of a healing journey that would walk people through the road to reclaiming your story. And then we intercept with you, and we thought, Susan's already done all of this. It's amazing, and it's so aligned. So Jeff and Rhonda will always go down as this incredible, I think you referred to it one time as a can't not do moment.
Exactly, because we talked once, we talked again, and I'm sitting in a chair thinking, why should they trust me? In this whole thing. And why should I trust them? What are we doing? And it was like, I couldn't not do it. It was obvious that no questions. I mean, we asked questions, we did due diligence, but no questions to God, just an accepting of how he had brought that together.
It's so beautiful. And now we're a week away. Well, by the time this podcast airs, it'll be like 5 days away from a New Song conference here in Tucson, and a month away from launching life groups using a New Song course that you've written. Tell us a little bit about what do you do for fun? Where do you live now? And then we'll get into all the nitty gritty and all the rich history you have.
I have hopped around a bit, but right now I'm in Michigan, close to Holland, Michigan. So we love Lake Michigan. We love to go to the beach, even through the winter, just to see the changes in what happens through the seasons. We moved here from Colorado, and so we had the mountains there, and now we have the water, and the water touches me in a special way. It calms me, it speaks to me, and I'm grateful that God has given that. I say I have 3 daughters, and I live with my middle daughter, Melissa, and her husband, and 5 children. So there's never a dull moment around the house, except for right now because they're traveling. So I'm all alone with the cat. And so we do life together, and it's a lovely thing. I think sometimes we think that we need to prove our independence, either as a young person growing up or as an older person, prove that we can do it on our own. But there's something to be said for doing life together. So there are advantages on both sides. What it does for me is allows me to do this work full time. If I did not live with them, then I would need to have a much larger income as far as providing for my home and all of those things. So it helps us both. I think I'm a help to them as well. And I love long walks, and I love to read, and I love the trees. And when that was one of my requests for a home to God was, could I just have a couple of trees that I could look out my window? And we live on 2 acres of wooded lot. So he really outdid himself in that way. And we're very happy to be back in the Midwest, which is where I grew up in Indiana, and my daughters grew up in Indiana. So Melissa is used to being here. So we feel at home again.
I think we need to have a retreat at her house.
Yes.
Trees and water, Susan. You have me at trees and water.
I know. That was another connection.
Well, Susan, you have such a rich history and ministry. Can you take us back to 1994 and share some of what has brought you to this point today and what you have written and how you minister to women?
That's a long time ago, isn't it? When you're doing dates on things and you have to put a date and you keep scrolling down, and I'm like, wow, this is a long time ago for when I was born and when I lived life. But I guess I would say that mission, the idea of mission, has been on my heart a long time, since I was a young girl. And I always felt that was going to be a part of my life, but I didn't know exactly how. And as so often happens, life takes over. And as I said, I have 3 daughters. They're all in their 40s now. But at that time, they were going to school. They were doing all these things, and you're busy as a mom. And I was doing small businesses and interior design and various things. And so life was busy. I began in 1985, I don't know how many listening to this are familiar with Bible Study Fellowship, BSF, but I was a teaching leader in Indiana with BSF for quite some years, and then pursued the possibility of going overseas with that ministry. And that's what I did in 1994. The family went. The youngest daughter, Jess, was in 4th grade, and Melissa was in 9th grade, and Stephanie was in her senior year. And we moved to Nigeria. So that was quite a change for everyone, but it was a really wonderful time. And while there, I taught the Bible and also started a women's center for widows and taught them sewing and small business and practical things. And so that was our humanitarian reason for being in the country. And I loved that. I love working hands on hands together with people in that way. And then in 2000 was led to return to the US and continued working with what was called Rafiki, which was the humanitarian arm of BSF, and continued working with them, developing similar centers in 10 different countries around Africa. So I would travel and lead and help develop those centers. And I loved it and began writing curriculum for them. And that was just the seeds of things that were to come. And then in 2008, God led me away from that ministry and took me back about a year later on a visit to Nigeria. And he used that time to give me a call really through other people who would sit down across the table from me and just share about their work, in particular with women, rescuing them from a variety of difficulties and really traumatic lifestyles, and then saying, now, we don't know what to do with them once we rescue them. We don't know how to teach them, how to turn them on a new path. And after about 6 conversations of that, God had just said, Susan, this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to start writing about this. And so I did, and established a nonprofit, Thrive Life Skills, and wrote from the perspective of someone who almost needs to read what's being taught and learn that, and then use that to teach the people. So it's very user-friendly to the national who's learning that. So everything from health and relationships and scripture and sewing and small business, those kinds of things. And so I traveled with that and used that and sent that around the world to be used by nationals and mission people who were on the field. And as I look back over that time, I think sometimes we get to a place in life and then we look back and say, all of these little steps led me to this place. But I believe that each one of those steps is a place unto itself, so it's not just doing that thing to get to this big thing. It's all of these things are right there in that moment. It's valuable and it's whole and it's right. And so when I look at that, I don't want to, and I hope others in their lives don't jump over all those places to get to something they feel is important. But each one of those areas was a place that God has for each of us to serve. And so that's how I got headed in this direction.
I love what you said there, that each step is a place unto itself. I think for me personally, I'm very destination driven. And so that's a reminder to me to enjoy the journey, that yes, does God build all of our experiences on top of one another? He definitely does, but that each step is a place to itself. I think that's a good reminder. As you began writing these different courses and empowering, I hear a lot of empowering people. As you begin to do that, what did you learn? What did you learn about healing? What did God sort of unfold for you in each of those steps when it came to helping others and their healing journey?
I imagined in myself, I thought in myself that I had a heart for those who had been suffering, for those who were suffering. And I felt that. I felt that compassion. I felt that love. I loved living and working in other places and connecting with them. But I don't think at that point, now looking back, that I really was able to connect with people in their suffering. It took events that happened in my own life in 2013, actually, is when God opened my own heart to real suffering, to a place where it wasn't an event that happened like a hurricane or a crisis of some kind like that. It was more a pulling back the curtain and revealing a reality that had been in place for 40 years that I knew nothing about. And then the fallout from that unveiling. And so it was this unexpected turn in my life. And suddenly life was precarious for me. And I know that God was holding on to me because the footing underneath me was very unsure. I couldn't find a foothold. And for the first time, I think I came in touch personally with real suffering. And much as of what I had done before, it was not wasted. It was not bad. It was not any of those things. But I realized that it had not come out of a pure heart of suffering. Suddenly, I was a divorced woman. I was on my own. I was in unfamiliar territory, and I needed to figure things out. And I couldn't use pat answers with myself. And when you ask what I'd learned, I realized that in many cases before, I had used very quick, pat spiritual answers. And so God then led me to begin thinking about suffering, to begin thinking about trauma. He pretty much compelled me because as we were talking before we started, I know Valerie mentioned something that God really asked her to do. And then she was like, no, and so when God put on my heart to write about suffering and trauma, I was like, no, I don't want anything to do with this. I don't have anything to say, God, not at this point. But he compelled me. And I did. I began to write about it from my heart. And I hope and pray from his heart as well, as he worked through me and took me through that process.
To be able to work with women or men, I guess, too, in different countries, and to be able to have the empathy that it sounds like God was utilizing your story to create in you to be able to connect with them. That's really, it's a beautiful place to sit knee to knee with someone. Give us some examples of like a pat answer, like, here's my heartache. What would be a pat answer? I love this topic because I think we have a lot of work that we can do to give some other options to those things.
Yes. So we often say things like, it's all going to be okay. We say things like, God has a purpose in this. And there's something even in the way that we say it, but sometimes it's not the way we say it. It's just the words. God has a purpose for this. Things are going to get better. One day, this will be just a distant memory, and it could be worse. And all of those things may be true, but in the moment, a person in the midst of suffering does not connect with those, because even if it could be worse in that moment of suffering, it is the worst for us right then. And we've talked about this before, Denisha and I, as to how suffering is not comparative. Suffering is suffering, and whatever we are going through at that moment. And so we can't say it's not so bad, or it's not as bad as someone else's, or, I don't even want to say some of the things that we say, you still have this, we'll just be grateful for that. The loss is the loss. And so we must be very careful.
That's one of the things that I value so much, Susan, about your heart for the healing journey is one, it's not the destination, it's the journey along the way. But your words and the way, as we're collaborating with you and working together on a new song, that it has been so beautiful to watch how you really just sit down. I just picture two friends sitting beside each other, cross-legged, just sitting on the floor, and one not trying to say, come on up, we're going to be a quick fix. We're going to fix this quick. At least this didn't happen, or so many of the things that you just mentioned. And I wonder if part of that is we are uncomfortable with suffering. It's
Yes.
hard, both the person in suffering and the person wanting to sit with the person in suffering.
Right. I think that is very true because, and I have to be careful how I say this, but even if we are the one who's attempting to come alongside, if we're honest, it will help us if that person who is suffering begins to heal and begins to what we think of as weave back into life as it should be. It helps us. It gives us relief, and we're able to then get back to our life as well, so to speak. So we're not comfortable. It's like when you're talking, you know how some friends you can be with in a car, on a plane ride or whatever, and some friends feel like they have to keep talking. Okay. And then there are other friends that you can be quiet for a while, and it's comfortable and it's okay. And it's that same feeling of being with someone in suffering, that there doesn't always need to be answers and forward movement and all of that. Sometimes it's okay just to sit and suffer and to come back into it as needed. When I first took this course and went on the road, so to speak, with it, it was in 2015, and I went for 3 weeks to My La refugee camp in Thailand for the Myanmar refugees, the refugees from Burma. And I went for 3 weeks traveling to various places in India. And I had told God before I left that I was not going to share my story, that I was going to take the message that he had given. And if he ever wanted me to share my story in particular, he would need to have someone ask me. And so I remember the first time in India that I spoke and I shared, and this woman came up to me and pulled me aside, and she looked me in the eye and she said, Susan, I want to know your story because I know it's there. And so we sat and we talked for a while, and I realized that in all my speaking before, nobody would have ever been able to see or sense that suffering in my eyes and in my words because it wasn't there. And so that was a real profound moment for me to know that God was going to use this somehow. I want to encourage other people that you may never know what that purpose is. It doesn't always turn out to be something like this. It can be something quiet. It can be something, mystical that you never know. It could be something in the heavenlies that just because of your faithfulness and your trust in God, that is impacting other things that happen and other people. But it's not our job to go looking for what the purpose was. It's only our job to accept it if God shows that to us. But it can be a variety of things.
I know we've talked about recently how our calling can often come out of our suffering, and I think in scripture, there's so many stories of how, God brought somebody through suffering for the purpose of being able to have that compassion and identify with whoever you're going to be ministering to. And so, that's just such the beautiful thing is, like I said, we want to avoid suffering. Nobody wants to experience pain, but just as Hebrews says, for the joy set before the Lord, he endured suffering. So there is joy and purpose, but often the suffering is partly where we experience the intimacy with Christ and the strength with Christ, and where we're sitting in that suffering so that we can indeed come alongside somebody else and say, okay, I know what it's like. I'm going to sit with you, but I'm going to hold that hope for you, that there's joy and there's purpose and calling to come. So it's just such a beautiful thing. Susan, as we think about here in Tucson about soon leading women in person and online through this healing course, why don't you share a little bit about your experience? I know you had experience in Colorado of leading women through this and what that was like and how did they receive it? Because even in the United States, sometimes I think we do tend to be like, okay, we're going to do this Bible study, this book study, but this is a very different journey. And I know for many of our women, it's going to be a very different experience. So share a little bit with us about how that was taking women through this course.
Yes, I am very grateful and excited about the fact that this is opening up into the US. Sometimes I guess you would start here and go international, and I kind of started international and I'm coming back home. And I'm so happy about that and see Reclaimed Story as a door that is opening for that. That's another reason that God brought us together that I'm so grateful for, an open door that I didn't have before. So I'm grateful to you all. We did have a 12-session workshop, we called it, in Colorado, in Erie, Colorado, around the Boulder area. And we called it A New Song. And the way we would, maybe you'd say, marketed it in the beginning was to use a verse from Exodus 23:20, that says, "See, I am sending an angel ahead of you to guard you along the way and to bring you to the place I have prepared." And so then I just asked, how did we envision that place to which he brings us? Because we've all thought of where we're going. We as women in particular might plan for that from the time we're little girls. We think, how is our life going to go? What will that look like? But then how is the reality different from that place that we expected? And the first session of the workshop was an introduction to that, to see if anybody was even interested. And we were going to need to limit it to 20 women after the initial evening because of the leadership that we had. And so almost immediately we had all those spots filled and realized that the women were waiting and hungry and ready to begin talking about life, about this journey, about the expectations, about what has really happened, and about the suffering that has come along the way. So we had women in their 20s and 30s, and we had a woman who was 92. We had women in their 80s. We had the gamut of ages and what they were doing, their places in life. We had women who had recently suffered, and we had those who were reacting to things in the past. We had women who weren't sure they had ever really suffered that much, until we began digging and thinking about things. And so it was a precious time of women opening their hearts, maybe with a little fear and trepidation at first, and maybe keeping the door slightly shut, but beginning to see that this was a safe place and a way to share. I believe that A New Song guides us through this process in a gentle way, in a patient way. One woman was able to put her finger on an event that had happened 80 plus years before and understand how that event had been impacting her relationship with God over the past years. And she shared that with me very openly. And it was not a frightening thing for her. It was not a devastating thing for her. It wasn't something she needed to put in the newspaper. It was just there. It was real. And she was able to make that connection. So this is not a like 6 steps to healing. It's a time of thinking and sharing. It's a courageous step into, I think, a relationship with suffering. That's kind of how I think of it, because there may be women who say, as we had some who said, I've never really experienced trauma. That's okay. That's not what we're going for, but we're going to discover ways that our expectations were not met in some way. And we discover how that has impacted us along the journey. I won't say any more about that right now. Maybe you want to talk about that whole process a little bit more, but it was a precious time together. And I so look forward to any opportunity to do that again.
Well, we are so excited to launch a new song through life groups at the beginning of August. We're going to be launching those groups. We're going to have some online because we have reclaimers all over the US and in 8 different countries. And then also here in Tucson in person. And boy, that we just love that your heart is that safe place where you can begin to explore those places where maybe we've closed those doors to suffering in our past and not wanted to open and peek in there. When you say a relationship with suffering, Susan, I love that. Not that I love having a relationship with suffering, hear me out there, but I love it because we have a relationship with suffering. It's just a matter of calling it forward, naming it, examining it, reflecting upon what does that look like and how does that play out in our lives each day. So when you give the example of something that happened 80 years ago that was impacting a relationship with the Lord today, that is real. We have a relationship with suffering, whether we choose to name it and look at it and identify it, or whether it plays out in our lives. I love that gentle journey that you take us on through a new song and those expectations. Woo. I saw one time this like a math equation and it said expectations minus observation equals frustration. And going back to examining what our expectations are and what we've actually observed in our life is such a beautiful and tender way to start. On behalf of us and on behalf of all of the women that are about to embark on this journey with you through a new song, thank you for doing the work. We're so thankful for God for all that He poured in and downloaded through you to be able to serve women in this very unique way. We have been looking for a very long time for some sort of a course, some sort of material to utilize with our women that's not just another book study, but that's something very deep, but very safe and sacred. And that is what a new song provides. So we are just so excited to launch that and to have you come to a new song conference and kind of kick us off. And what many people won't know is you're going to have a house full of people 2 days before this event as you train us and our team and a couple other teams as well to just how do we sit in suffering? How do we help other people examine their expectations versus their observations in life? So we are just so privileged, Susan, just to know you and to hear your heart and to be able to partner with you in getting this style, this way of examining our past and our present out to as many women as possible. That is our heart. Like everybody should go through this.
Well, I am so grateful to you all for making this possible, for taking this from my computer and from my hands and from my heart and putting it out there. I think you had asked at one point in time, how is this different for someone who's listening? How is this different from a Bible study, that they've been involved in, or another type of study, which are all, we have such a plethora of ways that we can study and encourage ourselves and learn. And I think there are a couple of ways that this is different. I think one is he's into the individuality and the personality of suffering in each woman. So it's not a generic answer. It's not this is what will help you. And so just apply these things. It's very individual. And then it comes at suffering from the perspective of seeing the need and then discovering the possible ways to meet that need, the possible mends. The answers are often big, but if we take that big answer and try to mold it into our needs, sometimes we don't quite know how to fit it correctly. And so I think it's important for us to see the need first. And this, I don't know if this will scare someone away or if it will actually help, but God created us as sensory persons. We are multi-sensory. We do a lot of reading and listening, but we are so much more than that. And he interacts with us in varied ways. So how it impacts you, sometimes even in a Bible study, it will say, how did this impact you? What does this mean to you? But the only tool that we're given is words. And sometimes we can't express in words what we really want to. And so beyond the spoken language, so we don't do anything strange or, mystical, but we do look at things from all of our senses and how our emotions touch what is happening in us. And I think I envision that this study that you'll do, the chapters that they're sent, that this is something that you don't complete and set aside, but that it stays maybe by your Bible or it stays on the table beside you and you go back to it over and over again because you're rethinking, you're re-answering, you're reapplying, you're revisiting and revising and reminding yourself of these things so that it's something that is tangible to your hands and your heart and your eyes for a long time to come. That's my hope.
I think that's encouraging to take it versus I don't think that scares us. I think that's very true. I know there are so many things that my head knows and learns, but it doesn't always make it to my heart. And that's that experiential piece of it when we actually begin to unfold it into our lives. Yes. And sometimes when it's only in our minds, when it stays there, it doesn't always come out and flow out into our lives. So our heart, our senses, I love that you incorporate all of that because that's how God made us to experience all of that. So that's very exciting. So I would say, Susan, if a woman were listening right now and she were thinking, okay, maybe they're in Tucson and they're going to come to the conference. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're in another state, but they're thinking, I think this is a journey that I would like to begin, a journey through a new song. What would you say to that woman who's possibly wondering, am I ready for this? Do I want to do this? How would she know? What would you say to her heart?
I think I would ask her to consider what that feeling of suffering or pain, of uncertainty, what that does in her life. If that feels a bit like a wilderness place that's hidden from others, maybe even from herself. If you feel that way, if you feel like this is something that I need to keep quiet because I don't know how to deal with it, what would someone else think? This is a part of my suffering, but what I need to do is get on with my real life. I would say to you that that place of hurt, that place of uncertainty or doubt, of pain, is a part of your story. It is a part of the way that you have traveled this journey to this point. And until you come to the place where you're able to weave that pain into the reality and expectation of your life, you will not have a really clear sense of well-being. You will not feel the care of others in the way that you want to, the surety of your ability to face what's coming in the future. And so let's take those bits and pieces and weave them together into something that is actually beautiful because of the fact of the lights and the darknesses and the joy and the sorrow. And that is what we can do together.
Susan, if we were to, like I said, have a group of women in front of us, and what about the women who say, but I've tried that, I've done that, and it didn't work? What would you say to those women who, like you said, are on the fence and just still hesitant to try something new? Because I hear that a lot. And I love what you said about the journey. I hear that, well, I thought I had dealt with that. I thought I had healed from that. Why am I still struggling with that? So how does this journey address some of those doubts and questions of, I've been there, done that. Why didn't that work? How is this going to be different?
Well, again, I don't know if this will be encouraging or not, but that is the journey. That is the coming to peace with suffering, is those ups and downs, those places of stall that we are each going to be hopefully directionally correct. Okay. We're going to be moving in the right direction. And that is one of the things that we will talk about in the small groups and in the sessions is how do I help myself? How do I see where I am at this point in time? How do I catch myself when I find I'm stalling in one place and I can't get past that? What do I do at that point? But the very fact that we are still experiencing those things just means that we are a human created in the image of God, waiting for that time when all things will be redeemed perfectly. One of the chapters that you will talk about is called Those Moments. And I'm not going to share the entire thing with you, but it's those moments, those screaming in the car moments. So it's written from my perspective, as these sessions are, that they come from my own experiences. And so it starts out that I'm years down the road and I'm helping others. And suddenly I'm in the car driving, screaming in the car. Those times happen. And what do we do when they happen? We experience them and we call somebody and say, hold on to me. Or we ask our traveling companion, our good shepherd, to hold on to us. And what I would say to the woman who says, I'm still experiencing some of these things, is perhaps she's also finding, though, as I have, that even though I still experience them, God never lets me go down to that same place where I was in the very beginning, where all I could do was sit on the floor and say just 5 more minutes. He never lets me go to that place again. And so, yes, we experience those things, but it takes sometimes coming together in a group like this and thinking through it in the way that we will to realize what progress we actually are making. And that those moments are not a sign that we're not making any progress. They're just a sign that we're not perfectly redeemed yet, and we will not be until some point far in time when we are with our Savior. Until now, we're going to go through it together.
That's beautiful. The picture that comes to mind as you say, we're never going to be in the same place again, is almost a spiral road up a mountain, right? We're still on the mountain of life until, we are fully redeemed. But as we go around that mountain, we're never in the same place. We might be on the same side, but we're not on that same exact spot. We're always moving toward healing.
Yes, well said.
Well, Susan, we just want to thank you so much again for joining us. And I know Denise and I are excited to meet you in person.
Oh.
I feel like we've known you for...
I know, but I'm ready for that personal meeting as well.
Yeah. And so once again, if you are in Tucson, we invite you to join the journey to sing a new song with us with Susan Habegger. And Reclaim Story will be there and many others here in Tucson on June 23rd and 24th. I can't believe it's coming up next week, but we invite you to do that. And if you are not in Tucson, continue to follow us on social media, subscribe to our newsletter, because we will be continuing to share pieces of this journey and how you can join the journey. And we will be opening life groups up, like Denisha said, So if you're not in Tucson, you'll be able to still join that. But we are just so thankful to you, Susan, and we thank you for sharing more of who you are and your heart. That's what we wanted people to kind of get to know you, at least, through this podcast, and become familiar with your heart and journey. So we thank you so much. And so, Susan, how can we find you? How can we connect with you on social media or through your newsletter? How can we connect with you in your ministry of Thrive Life Skills?
Yes, you can go to the website, which is thrivelifeskills.com, just all that together. I do have a Facebook page, Thrive Life Skills. You can even email me, which is susanh@thrivelifeskills.org. And those are the best ways right now. And then I'm sure we'll get more information out as time goes on as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Susan. Well, thank you again. And we hope that you, our listeners, have found hope and encouragement through our conversation. And we look forward to being back with you next time.
Thanks for listening. I pray you found hope in today's conversation and maybe even feel a little less alone in your story. Stay connected with us on Facebook and Instagram at Reclaimed Story. Want to learn more about living a reclaimed life and how you can be a part of our growing community of reclaimers? Check out our website at reclaimedstory.com. All of those links and more will be in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this inspirational podcast, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. Not only will you be the first one to know when new content comes out, but it is also a huge help in helping us reach more people to live the reclaimed life.